Most people know what they want. They just never say it out loud, not to anyone else, and often not even to themselves, because wanting something real, something that actually matters, feels exposed. It feels like setting yourself up. If you admit you want more and it doesn't come, the disappointment has a name now. It has your name on it. So instead, people keep it vague. They tell themselves they're fine with where they are. They say someday instead of this year. They wait for circumstances to shift, for someone to notice, for the right moment to finally arrive. That strategy has a cost. And the cost isn't just that you don't get what you want. The cost is that you spend years being quietly frustrated with a life you never actually tried to build. This episode is about ending that. Not with a list of hacks or a theory about manifestation, but with something more honest and more demanding. The decision to admit what you want, ask for it directly, act before you feel ready, and become strong enough to carry what you're asking for. Getting what you want does not begin with luck. It does not begin with talent or timing or waiting for someone to see your potential. It begins with one private act of honesty, admitting the truth to yourself about what you actually want from this one life you have. Everything else in this episode builds from that. 10 points, each one a different layer of the same problem, the gap between what you want and what you are currently doing to get it. Not a motivational gap, a practical one. By the end, you will have a clearer map of exactly where the gap is and what closing it actually requires. 1. Admit what you truly want. Before you can ask the world for anything, you have to stop lying to yourself about what you want. That sounds simple. It is not. Most people have spent years building a careful distance between themselves and their real desires. Not because they stopped wanting things, but because wanting feels dangerous. Wanting exposes you. If you openly admit that you want a different career, a closer relationship, a bigger income, a life that looks nothing like your current one, and then it doesn't happen, the failure is visible. It has a shape. You can no longer protect yourself with, "I wasn't really trying." So people learn to keep their desires vague. They describe their ambitions in language safe enough to take back. "I'd like to do something more meaningful someday. I've always thought about starting something. It would be nice if things were different." The language is soft because the desire underneath it is being protected, wrapped in enough uncertainty that disappointment can't fully land. The problem is that desire wrapped in protection never becomes direction. It just becomes a permanent low-grade ache. The sense that something is missing, that you're capable of more, that life could be different, but never the decision to do anything about it. The first act of power in this whole process is not impressive. It doesn't require courage in the public sense. It happens quietly, alone, and it looks like this. You let yourself want what you actually want, without justifying it, without immediately asking whether it's realistic, without shrinking it to fit what seems acceptable. Some people are afraid that if they admit their real desires, those desires will reveal something embarrassing about them, that they're greedy, or naive, or too ambitious, or not ambitious enough. But desire doesn't say anything shameful about your character. It says something honest about your life. And honesty, even private honesty, is where clarity begins. There is a version of this episode that skips this point and gets straight to strategy and action. But strategy built on a desire you haven't fully admitted to yourself will always feel hollow. You'll do the work without conviction. You'll pursue the goal without the energy that comes from genuine want. So before the plan, before the ask, before the action, sit with the real question. Not what should I want, or what is realistic for someone like me. Just, what do I actually want? If there were no risk of judgment, no chance of failure, no one to disappoint, What would the honest answer be? There is something else this admission does that is easy to underestimate. When you finally stop pretending you are fine with less than you want, you also stop spending energy on the maintenance of that pretense. The energy that was going into suppressing the desire, rationalizing the gap, and telling yourself a comfortable story about why now isn't the right time, that energy becomes available. Not immediately, not all at once, but gradually, as the internal friction of living against your own wants decreases, something clarifies. The direction you've been avoiding becomes visible, and the first step, which felt impossible while you were pretending the destination didn't exist, becomes something you can actually see. That answer is the starting point. Everything else comes after. If this is already landing somewhere honest for you, leave a like. It helps this reach someone who has been carrying the same silence for too long. Stay with me, because this gets more practical from here. 2. Turn the wish into a clear target. Wanting a better life is not a goal. It is a mood. And the difference between a mood and a goal is the difference between drifting and moving. Most people stay in the mood phase indefinitely. They want more. They feel the pull of something better. But the desire never gets specific enough to do anything with. It stays in the background, present enough to make them dissatisfied with what they have, but too vague to give them a direction. Clarity is what turns desire into something the mind can actually work with. Not clarity as an intellectual exercise, clarity as a commitment. You are saying to yourself, this is the specific thing I am after. This is what it looks like when I have it. And this is the time frame I am working inside. That kind of definition changes how your mind engages with the goal. It goes from passive awareness to active orientation. Think about what happens when you decide to buy a specific car. Suddenly you see that car everywhere. It was always on the road. Your brain just wasn't filtering for it. A specific goal does the same thing to opportunity. When you know precisely what you're looking for, you begin to notice the relevant conversations, the useful connections, the small openings that you walked past before because you weren't sure what you were looking for. The process of getting specific is worth doing slowly. Not, I want a better job, but what kind of work, in what kind of environment, doing what specifically, for what kind of income, by what point in time. Not, I want to be healthier, but what does healthy look like for me? What is the specific metric I'm aiming at? What does my week actually look like when I'm living it? The more precisely you can describe the destination, the more real it becomes. Not just as an idea, but as something you are actually navigating toward. There is also something important about the why. Knowing what you want is useful. Knowing why you want it is what sustains you when the process gets difficult, because it will get difficult. Every real goal eventually hits a period where the energy drops, the progress slows, and the easier option is to quietly let the whole thing go. The people who push through that period are usually the ones whose reason for wanting the thing is substantial enough to outweigh the discomfort of continuing. The specificity also does something else that people rarely expect. It makes the goal feel more real before you have it. When the destination is vague, it stays at a comfortable emotional distance. Something to want, not something to pursue. When it becomes specific, it stops being a fantasy and starts being a destination. You stop waiting for inspiration to act and start looking for the next concrete step. Because concrete steps toward a concrete destination is exactly what the goal now requires. A wish stays soft. A target has edges, and edges are what make it possible to aim. 3. Stop waiting to be discovered. There is a fantasy that many capable people carry for years without examining it closely. It goes something like this. If you do good enough work, stay patient, and keep your head down, eventually the right person will notice. The opportunity will find you. Someone in a position to open a door will recognize what you're worth and act on it. This fantasy is comfortable because it removes the risk of direct pursuit. You never have to ask. You never have to put yourself forward. You never have to face the particular vulnerability of saying out loud, "I want this," and "I think I am capable of it." Instead, you keep doing your work and trust that quality eventually speaks for itself. Sometimes it does, but more often it doesn't. Not because the work isn't good, but because good work done quietly is easy to overlook in a world where everyone is busy, attention is scarce, and the people who move forward are usually the ones who made their desire visible. Waiting to be discovered is often fear operating under the cover of patience. It feels like a virtue. It feels like you're not being pushy or presumptuous. But underneath it, the actual function it serves is protection. You can't be rejected if you never put yourself forward. You can't be told no if you never ask. You can't fail if you never try in a way that counts. The cost is enormous. Years pass. Skills develop. Potential accumulates. And none of it moves because the person carrying it is waiting for someone else to initiate what they need to initiate themselves. There is also something worth naming about what this waiting does to your sense of yourself over time. Every year you spend waiting to be found is a year you spend in a passive relationship with your own life. As a person, things happen to, rather than a person who makes things happen. That posture, maintained long enough, starts to feel like identity, like the kind of person you simply are. And changing it requires not just new behavior, but a different self-concept entirely. There is also something worth naming about what this waiting does to your sense of yourself over time. Every year you spend waiting to be found is a year you spend in a passive relationship with your own life. As a person, things happen to, rather than a person who makes things happen. That posture, maintained long enough, starts to feel like identity, like the kind of person you simply are. Changing it requires not just new behavior, but a genuine reconsideration of the story you have been telling yourself about why the world has not yet given you what you want. The honest version of that story for most people is simpler and less comfortable than the waiting narrative suggests. The world has not given you what you want, largely because you have not asked for it in a direct, visible, persistent way. That is not a failure of the world. It is an instruction. The shift this point is asking for is not about becoming aggressive or self-promotional in a way that feels false. It is about recognizing that the responsibility for your life moving in the direction you want belongs to you, not to a boss who notices, not to a contact who remembers you, not to circumstances that eventually align, to you. And acting from that recognition, making yourself visible, stating your interest, asking for what you want, is not arrogance. It is just responsibility taken seriously. No one is coming to find you. The door you are waiting to open has a handle. It is on your side. 4. Ask without apologizing for wanting more. Most people ask badly, not because they don't know what they want, by this point they do, but because the ask itself is loaded with apology. It sounds like, "I know this might be a lot to ask, but," or "I don't want to seem like I'm pushing, but," or "maybe this is too much, but I was wondering if." The actual request is buried under so much preemptive softening that it barely lands, and often it doesn't land at all. The other person picks up on the uncertainty and responds to it, matching the energy of someone who clearly doesn't expect a yes. This hedging comes from a specific belief that wanting more is somehow inappropriate. That ambition needs to justify itself. That desire should be quiet and modest until it has proven it deserves otherwise. So people ask for less than they want. They leave a raise on the table because they didn't ask for the full number. They accept a smaller opportunity because they didn't ask if a bigger one was available. They stay in a situation that isn't right for them because asking to change it felt like too much. Asking clearly does not mean demanding. It does not mean being aggressive or indifferent to other people's constraints. It means respecting your desire enough to give it a real voice, stating what you want specifically, without building in the apology that invites a smaller response. There is a simple test for whether you are asking or apologizing. After you make the request, notice how you feel. If you feel relieved just to have said it, that is probably an honest ask. If you feel slightly ashamed for having asked at all, if you are already preparing to say never mind, it's fine before they respond, you are apologizing for a desire you haven't fully given yourself permission to have. The permission has to come from inside before the ask will work on the outside. Not permission to receive what you want. That's not yours to grant. But permission to want it in the first place, to consider it a legitimate desire, not an embarrassing one, to ask for it cleanly without the preemptive shrinking that signals you don't really believe you should have it. It is also worth noticing what happens to other people when you ask clearly. Most people, when asked something direct and honest, respond to the directness itself. There is a kind of respect that a clean ask generates, even when the answer is no, because it treats the other person as someone capable of handling a real request, rather than someone who needs to be managed with carefully softened language. The people who learn to ask well often find that the quality of their interactions changes not just in outcome, but in texture. The conversations become more honest. The relationships become cleaner. The energy that used to go into the elaborate softening ritual gets redirected into the actual substance of what is being discussed. Ask clearly. Ask specifically. Ask once without apologizing. Then let the answer be whatever it is. But ask. If this episode is giving you something useful, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. The second half of this conversation is where the real work begins. 5. Match your request with a bigger self-image. There is a gap most people never talk about between what they say they want and what they actually believe they deserve. They say they want the promotion, the relationship, the income, the creative life, the opportunity. They mean it, or they mean it on the surface. But somewhere underneath the stated desire is a quieter belief doing the opposite work. A belief that says, people like me don't usually get that. That's for people who had better circumstances, better training, better timing. I can want it, but I shouldn't expect it. That belief doesn't announce itself as a belief. It shows up as behavior, as the way you lower your voice when you talk about your ambitions, as the instinct to add, but I know it's a long shot after describing what you want, as the pattern of pursuing things up to a point, and then, right before a real opportunity materializes, finding reasons to hesitate, to not follow up, to let the window close. This is self-image doing its job. The mind is extraordinarily consistent about protecting its own picture of who you are and what you are capable of. When behavior starts to deviate from that picture, when you begin moving towards something that feels bigger than your self-concept, the system corrects. Not consciously, just through subtle resistance, doubt, distraction, procrastination, and the quiet conclusion that maybe you were getting ahead of yourself. The implication is uncomfortable. To get more from life, you have to update who you believe you are, not the performance of confidence, the actual internal picture, the way you talk to yourself about your capabilities, the framework you use to decide what is and isn't realistic for you, the assumptions you carry about what kind of life someone with your background, your history, your current situation is entitled to build. This update does not happen from a single decision. It happens from accumulated evidence, from small actions that produce results that don't fit the old story, from choices that a smaller version of you would have avoided, from the gradual experience of operating at a level you weren't sure you could sustain. But it also requires deliberate attention to the narrative. What are you telling yourself about why you haven't moved further yet? Is that story serving you, or is it just protecting you from the discomfort of trying harder? Because the version of you that can actually carry what you're asking for has to exist before the opportunity fully arrives, or it will arrive and find no one ready to hold it. The self-image update is not a one-time decision. It is a practice of noticing when the old story activates, of choosing not to act from it, of building a new story through behavior rather than through affirmation. Each time you take an action that the smaller version of you would have avoided, you deposit something into a different account, and over time, the balance in that account becomes the evidence on which a new self-concept is built. 6. Build a plan that makes the goal real. There is a particular kind of relationship with a goal that looks like commitment, but is actually just comfort. You think about it often. You feel genuinely drawn to it. You have told a few people about it. You have maybe bought a book, watched a video, made a list. You feel, in some ambient way, like you are working toward it. But if someone asked you to show them the specific steps you are taking this week, the concrete actions, the deadlines, the resources being built, the answer would be quiet. This is wishing out loud. And wishing out loud has the particular danger of producing the emotional experience of progress without any of the actual progress, the feeling of movement without the movement itself. A real goal requires structure, not a complicated system, just enough architecture to separate intention from action. What specifically needs to happen? In what order? By when? What resources does it require that you don't currently have? What skills need to be built? What relationships need to be made? What daily behavior needs to change? These questions are not exciting. They are the difference between a goal and a fantasy. The plan does not have to be perfect. In fact, the first version of it will almost certainly be wrong. The timeline too optimistic, the steps in the wrong order, the obstacles underestimated. That is expected. The purpose of the first plan is not accuracy. It is commitment. The moment you write out the actual steps, assign them dates, and start moving through them, the goal changes its nature. It stops being an idea and starts being a project. Something you are building, not something you are waiting for. There is also a clarifying function to this process. When you sit down to make a real plan and find that you cannot, when the specific steps don't come, when the timeline seems impossible, when the daily behaviors required are ones you are genuinely unwilling to adopt, that is important information. It means the desire is not yet matched by real commitment, and knowing that is useful. It gives you the honest choice. Build the commitment or reconsider the goal. Either is a valid response. Continuing to wish without deciding is not. A plan also changes the conversation you have with yourself about why things aren't moving. Without a plan, the reason is always vague. I haven't found the right time. I'm still getting ready. Things have been busy. With a plan, the question becomes sharper. Did I do what the plan required today? That question is harder to avoid, and harder to avoid is exactly what real progress needs. Make the plan. Make it specific. Make it honest. Then follow it until reality gives you reason to adjust it. 7. Act before confidence arrives. Most people have the sequence backwards. They are waiting to feel ready before they move, waiting to feel confident before they take the step that requires confidence, waiting to feel certain before they make the decision that uncertainty is built into. And in that waiting, months pass, sometimes years. The goal stays at the same distance because the action that would close the distance keeps being deferred until the internal feeling arrives that would make it feel safe to take. That feeling almost never arrives on its own. Confidence is not a precondition for action. It is a consequence of it. The brain does not generate belief in your ability to do something from thinking about it. It generates that belief from doing it, from the direct experience of attempting something, surviving the discomfort, and collecting evidence that you are capable of operating in that territory. This is how evidence works in the nervous system. The person who gives the presentation and survives it becomes more capable of giving the next one, not because they studied more, but because they have direct proof now that the situation is survivable. The person who makes the ask and lives through the uncertainty of waiting for a response becomes incrementally more capable of making the next ask. The action produces the evidence. The evidence updates the belief. The updated belief makes the next action slightly easier. None of this happens in your head before you move. It only happens after. This does not mean recklessness. It does not mean ignoring preparation or moving without any foundation. It means recognizing that at some point, preparation becomes a disguise for avoidance. That the research, the planning, the learning, all of which are genuinely useful up to a point, can become a permanent holding pattern if the standard for readiness keeps moving forward every time you approach it. There is a version of staying prepared that is really staying safe. It produces no results, accumulates no evidence, and closes no gap. The only thing that closes the gap is contact with the actual situation, the real conversation, the real attempt, the real ask. And contact always feels premature from the inside. That feeling is not a warning. It is the texture of being at the edge of your current experience, which is exactly where movement happens. You will not feel completely ready. That is not a sign that you need more time. It is a sign that you are standing at exactly the right place. There is one more thing worth saying here. The people you look at and think seem naturally confident, the ones who walk into rooms and speak without visible hesitation. Almost none of them started that way. What you are seeing is the accumulation of 1,000 imperfect actions that built their evidence base over time. You are seeing the result. You are not seeing the version of them that was uncertain, that hesitated, that moved before they felt ready and found out they could. That version exists. It was just earlier in the story. Move first. The confidence follows. It has always been in that order. 8. Handle rejection without shrinking the dream. At some point you will ask for something real, and the answer will be no. Not a maybe, not a redirection, not a let's talk about this more. A clear no. And the moment it lands, there will be a pressure, immediate and familiar, to reinterpret the desire itself. To decide that you were being unrealistic, that the thing you wanted was too much, that the fact that it was refused is evidence you should not have asked in the first place. That interpretation is almost never accurate, but it is very convenient because it ends the discomfort quickly. If you no longer want the thing, you no longer have to risk being told no again. The dream gets smaller, the exposure disappears, and you can return to the safer ground of wanting only what you are already certain you can have. A no is almost never a final verdict on the desire. It is a piece of information about a specific ask in a specific moment with a specific person or situation. It might mean the timing was wrong. It might mean the ask needed to be framed differently. It might mean this particular path to the goal is closed and a different one needs to be found. It might mean nothing about the validity of the goal itself. The question to ask after rejection is not, was I wrong to want this? The question is, what does this tell me about my approach? Those are completely different inquiries. The first one questions the desire. The second one questions the strategy. One shrinks the dream. The other refines it. This is harder than it sounds, because rejection has a way of touching things deeper than the specific request. It can activate older feelings about worth, about belonging, about whether someone like you gets to have the things you're reaching for. When that happens, the rejection feels like confirmation of something, not just feedback on a single attempt. The practice is to feel the rejection fully, not to suppress it or perform indifference, and then to separate it from the goal. The no happened. It stings. It is allowed to sting, and the desire is still valid. Both things are true at the same time. The maturity this requires is not the absence of pain. It is the refusal to let the pain rewrite the goal. Every person who has built something real has a list of rejections behind them that could have ended it. The difference between the ones who continued and the ones who stopped is rarely talent or timing. It is usually just that decision, made quietly, without an audience, to adjust the approach and go again. The more often you make that decision, the less weight rejection carries. Not because it stops hurting, but because you develop a track record of surviving it. You have evidence now that a no does not end you, that the desire survives contact with refusal, that you are someone who goes again, and that track record changes your relationship with risk, because you know from experience that the worst that happens when you ask is a no, and a no has never actually stopped you. Adjust the approach. Keep the direction. Go again. 9. Give the process 90 days of serious effort. One of the most common ways people fail at goals is not dramatic. There is no single moment of quitting. There is just a gradual fade. The effort becomes less consistent, the focus diffuses, other things fill the space, and eventually the goal is technically still there, but practically abandoned, not given up on, just quietly deprioritized until it stops moving at all. This happens partly because the timeline is undefined. When you do not commit to a specific period of real effort, there is no moment where you are forced to honestly evaluate whether you are actually trying. The goal can drift indefinitely without ever requiring a real reckoning. A 90-day commitment changes this, not because 90 days is a magic number, but because it is long enough to produce meaningful results and short enough to sustain serious effort. It is a container that forces honesty. Inside this window, you are genuinely trying. At the end of it, you evaluate with real information instead of vague impressions. The commitment has to be specific. One goal, one clear desire, daily action that is defined in advance, not a general intention to work on it, but a concrete behavior, one application sent, one conversation initiated, 1 hour of focused work, one skill practiced. The consistency of small daily action over 90 days produces more than sporadic large efforts ever do, because it changes the relationship between you and the goal. It goes from something you're thinking about to something you're actually doing every day. What also happens over 90 days of consistent effort is that the goal becomes real to you in a different way, not as an idea you carry, but as a project you are inside. You start accumulating small evidence. You learn which parts of your approach are working and which need to change. You encounter obstacles that reveal what you are actually made of. You discover whether the desire you named at the beginning is as genuine as you thought, or whether the daily reality of pursuing it reveals something more complicated. All of that information is valuable, and none of it is available until you actually begin. At the end of the 90 days, you will have real information. Either the approach is working and needs to be continued and refined, or it is not working and needs to be changed. Both outcomes are useful. What is not useful is the space before the 90 days, the indefinite, comfortable non-commitment that keeps the dream technically alive while never actually testing it. That is a different relationship with a goal than most people ever allow themselves to have. Not dreaming about it, not occasionally working on it, actually committing to a defined window of real effort and letting the results speak honestly. It is demanding. It is also the only version of pursuing a goal that generates the kind of evidence your nervous system and your self-respect actually needs. Pick the goal, define the daily action, start the clock, give it everything for 90 days, then look honestly at what the effort produced and decide what comes next. 10. Become the person who can hold what they asked for. There is a version of getting what you want that most people do not think about until it is too late. You ask for the opportunity, you get it, and then it is too large. The responsibility is more than you were prepared for. The relationship requires a version of you that does not yet exist. The income creates decisions you do not know how to make. The freedom reveals that you did not actually know what you wanted to do with freedom. The success arrives, and you find, quietly and confusingly, that you are not quite the person who can carry it. This is not failure. It is the most honest signal that getting what you want is only half the work. The other half is becoming someone capable of holding it. Every significant goal you pursue is asking something of you beyond effort and strategy. It is asking you to grow into a version of yourself that the current version of you cannot fully access yet. The bigger career requires someone who can manage uncertainty, make unpopular decisions, and sustain performance under pressure. The meaningful relationship requires someone who can be honest, present, and willing to be known. The financial goal requires someone who can delay gratification, think long-term, and make peace with risk. The creative life requires someone who can work without external validation and keep going through long periods without visible results. These are not skills you can acquire in advance and then apply. They are qualities that develop through the experience of pursuing the goal itself, through the setbacks that teach you something about your own resilience, through the decisions that clarify your actual values, through the moments where you could have quit and didn't, and through the slow realization that you are no longer the person who started. This is why the biggest version of what you want takes longer than you think it should. Not because it is out of reach, but because the reaching changes you, and the change is not a side effect. It is the point. Get clear on what you want. Ask for it directly. Act before you feel ready. Handle the rejection without abandoning the direction. Put in 90 days of real effort. And through all of it, pay attention to who you are becoming, because that person is the one who will ultimately determine how much of what you asked for you are able to keep. Most people think about getting what they want as a transaction. I do the right things, the outcome arrives, and then I am satisfied. But the people who build genuinely meaningful lives discover something different. The doing changes the person. The pursuit produces the growth. The obstacles reveal capacities that comfort never would have. And by the time the goal is reached, the person standing there is not the same person who started, which is exactly why they can hold it. The goal and the growth are the same project. They always were. Everything in this episode comes down to one decision: to stop treating your own desires as something to be managed quietly and start treating them as something worth building a life around. That means admitting what you actually want, not the safe version, the real version. It means turning the vague wish into a specific target with a timeline and a plan. It means stopping the quiet wait for someone to notice and making yourself visible. It means asking without the apology built into the ask. It means acting before the confidence arrives, because the confidence comes from the action, not before it. And it means being honest about the most demanding part, that getting what you want requires becoming someone capable of holding it, not just working harder, actually growing in resilience, in clarity, in the capacity to carry a bigger life without letting it collapse under the weight of a self-image that hasn't caught up. None of this is easy, but it is simpler than most people make it. The complexity usually comes from the avoidance, from all the ways the mind finds to stay comfortable while telling itself it is still trying. You know what you want. You have probably known for a long time. The question this episode is leaving you with is not whether the goal is realistic, or whether the timing is right, or whether you are ready enough yet. The question is whether you are willing to stop waiting and start. Start with the admission, then the target, then the ask, then the action. And somewhere inside that sequence, you will find that the life you were waiting for was always something you had to build, and that the building was always available to you on any ordinary day, from wherever you actually are. The people who get what they want are not a separate category of human being. They are not luckier in any fundamental way, or more talented, or more deserving. What separates them is simpler and less flattering to those who are still waiting. They decided, they made the admission, they named the target, they asked without apologizing, they moved before they were ready. They survived the rejection and adjusted the approach. They gave the process enough time and effort to generate real information, and they became, through the doing of all of it, someone large enough to hold what they built. That sequence is available to you. It always has been. The only thing standing between you and it is the decision to stop treating your own life as something that happens to you, and to start treating it as something you are building, one honest choice at a time. If this episode gave you something real, subscribe and follow the playlist in front of you now, and write "ready" in the comments. Not because everything is in place, but because you have decided to move anyway.